Yes, please.
Hi everybody, I think we're going to get started. My name is Arthur Levy. As many of you know, this is one in a series of programs that the Rutgers Center for Corporate Law and Governance is putting on this semester. If you want to see more about our upcoming events, look at our website, cclg.rutgers.edu, and just click on events, and you'll see what we have cooking over the next couple of weeks. We had a great event last night. We've got this today. We have something on April 7th, which is my stuff going on in Newark. So I'd encourage you to take a look. So let me quickly introduce our speakers for today. We've got two terrific speakers. ETHELYN GESCHWIND is a director for strategic sourcing at Verizon, but lately she's been doing a lot of thinking and deliberating about career issues. And in fact, she's the author of a recent book called Perfect Prep, an insider's guide to acing your college interview. So she's done a lot of thinking about careers in addition to her day job. Tara PELLICORI is our grad from 2008. She is now an associate at DLA Piper, but she's also our adjunct and teaching, I think this fall, again, a class called Corporate Lawyering. I know many of you know her. So as you know, we're here today to talk about the situation with women in the workplace, and Professor Russell and I wrote in the blurb discussing this event that corporate and business law is reputed to be a profession dominated by men. And even though some firms have made great strides in this area, we understand from the studies and from what we hear back from our own grads that there are still serious gender gaps. We know that there are certainly pay gaps. There was a funny story, and then I'll stop talking, I promise. There was a funny story on NPR the other day where a woman comedian said, you know, how many women out there are CEOs in like the top 100 companies in the US? And she said, interestingly, the number of CEOs in the top 100 companies is 7. And so she sort of hesitated and said, you know, maybe 7, maybe that's not so bad. Like 7 could turn into 12, could be 15. And then she said, well, that's true, 7, but the number of CEOs of top 100 companies, the number of CEOs whose name is John is 14. So there are more CEOs, twice as many CEOs named John as there are women CEOs in the top 100 companies. So I thought that was a very sort of funny introduction to the topic. I'll stop now. I thought each of you guys would take maybe 3 or 4 minutes, just give us a quick overview of sort of what you've seen, and then the idea is to have you all and Professor Russell and I, any of us, ask questions and turn this into a bit more of a discussion. So with that, Tara, if you want to start, it doesn't matter to me.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out today. It's an important topic, and I'm glad to see it resonated with so many of you. And particularly kudos to all the men in the room, because it's, in large part, you know, it's going to take both genders to effectuate change, right? So a special job for you guys. So as Professor Levy mentioned, my name is Tara PELLICORI. I'm an associate at DLA Piper. I have started my career at Pepper Hamilton, actually thanks to an adjunct professor of Rutgers who called me up to the front of class one day. So don't underestimate any of your resources or connections. And then from there I transitioned to DLA Piper during my 3rd year. I practiced corporate and securities, corporate and finance, almost exclusively private securities, because, as you mentioned, I'm the class of 2008, which wasn't exactly the economic demise was a hard time, especially to get into some of the public securities work. You know, coming back to what Professor Levy said in terms of what we see out there, I, as some of my former students will tell you, I believe in transparency. So I'm going to be extremely authentic, extremely transparent with you, and I also want you to know that everything I'm about to share with you is my perspective, and it's also something that I believe we all have control over. And I say that we have control over it because I think it took me about 8 years of practice to realize I had control over any of it, right? So take that, think about that as you move forward in your own careers and hear what I'm saying. I think there are many reasons that there are less women than men in this and many other professions. I tried to come up with for you with what I thought were the top maybe 3 reasons. I think the first of those reasons is that women believe it's not a flexible area of practice. right? And there's some truth to that, and I'll kind of say these at a high level, and then to the extent they're of interest to you and you guys want to ask questions of us about them, I'll leave it open. So one, flexible schedules. People are intimidated by the hours, the demands of the work. Women want families, and they think that there are other areas of practice that lend themselves to having a better work-life balance than corporate law. Number two, I would say women don't ask for things. So based on my experience and the experience of my colleagues who I've had this conversation with, we expect to often be rewarded based on merit, right? If I have a good attitude and I don't complain and I work hard and I'm the most prepared person in the room and smart, a collaborator and willing to make sacrifices, if I make those sacrifices, I'm going to reap the rewards of them. And what I found was myself and a lot of my colleagues didn't reap the rewards of them. In fact, it was sometimes the people who put in 50% of the effort, made 50% of the sacrifices, but then went and said, hey, Professor Levy, I'd love to jump on that deal with you. And he got to work on the deal that I thought I had been proving myself to Professor Levy about, right? As a result of not asking for things, we can then play the martyr a little bit, right? Because now I'm a little bit mad at him. Because didn't he notice that I've been working so hard? Why wouldn't he have chosen me for this best deal? The truth is, that's not fair, right? That's not fair of me to put on him. I didn't ask him for that opportunity, and I can't expect him to know that I wanted it. So, asking for things. And the third, I'd say, is what is referred to as micro inequities. So is anyone familiar with the concept of micro inequities? I wasn't. I wasn't until I had like a fantastic conversation during my 5th year with a diversity and inclusion manager. And the conversation started something like this. I'm very close with her as well, so I should mention that. So she's fantastic. And she was asking about how working with this particular partner was going, and I said, oh, it's good, it's good. She said, Tara, you're hesitating. Why are you hesitating? I said, no, it's just like, were you ever around someone who constantly complimented you, but you were like, I'm pretty sure he's insulting me, but I feel like I seem like a crazy person if I said that, right? And we went into this conversation, and one of the things that does happen with a lot of my male colleagues are micro inequities. Look, discrimination, sexual-based, these egregious macro inequities, they still happen, but they're far and few between, right? Your partner calling you into your office and saying, pull down your blouse a little if you want to get on this deal. People are smarter than that now. Not all of them, right? That's why we have employment lawyers still so busy, but most of them are, right? But what they're not as sensitive to is this micro concept. So an example is you walk into a room and someone says, you introduce someone to a client and you say, please let me introduce you to Tim. Tim is our rock star mid-level associate. He actually has in-house experience prior to coming to DLA, so I think he'll add fantastic value to this transaction. He'll have both the big law and the in-house perspective. I want you to meet Arthur, who actually was, has done more of these types of transactions in this industry than any associate at the firm. And please let me introduce you to Tara, who's our senior associate here. And let me tell you, John, I'm gonna go John. John, if you get a chance, you gotta stop by our office. She has 2 of the most beautiful boys you'll ever see. And I could never, like, I was like, that was so mean. But then I'm like, I guess it wasn't. I mean, they are pretty cute, right? Like, you should stop by and see them. But I couldn't figure out for a long time why those type of comments bothered me. And then I realized it was because they are saying that I have a different type, right, or a lesser worth than my male colleagues. And what's most interesting to me about that is I don't think they do it a lot of them I don't think do it intentionally. And that's going to be the behavior that's hardest to change. So with that said, let me pass it along here to my co-panelist.
Okay. Hi. So in addition to my full-time job and the book I write and working with high school students, my next passion is about working with women, mentoring women. I have a mentoring circle in my company with my team. And this is what we focus on every week when we talk about women's issues. So let me give you a little bit of background. I graduated with a degree in chemical engineering from Columbia a long time ago. Went to work for Colgate-Palmolive. I worked for a man I was the 3rd woman engineer in the Department of 100. And I worked for a man who said, women should not be engineers. You should stay home and have babies. That was a quote. I went looking to another manager to see if maybe I could change jobs, and he said he wanted me on his team because he could pay me less. Because I'm not responsible for a family. And by the way, a single man would ultimately be responsible for a family, so he doesn't pay him less. I stayed with the first male chauvinist pig, not the second. Then I went to work for a pharmaceutical company. At that point, I was doing more of sourcing, procurement, and there was an industry dinner that took place every year at the Waldorf Astoria. At the time, it was the largest sit-down dinner in the city of New York. And that was the first year that the entertainment was not strippers. Because there were a few more women coming up in the business, and they were a little bit offended. Okay. And then I went to work for what was then 9X, became Verizon, and at that point, as Tara said, people got coached, trained, and so they knew not to be obvious about their discrimination. But it is still there. It's certainly gotten better, but it's still there. But I'll agree with Tara to say, for the most part, people don't really mean it. They're used to what they know and what they've done, and they sort of keep with that. So what we're focusing on is really what I call awareness. So women, let's face it, we are different than men. Men, we are different than you are. We behave differently, we act differently, we react differently. And that's okay. We don't want to be the same. But that doesn't mean that we can't compete with men, right, and win. We have to be aware of how we act, what, if anything, we want to change about ourselves, and then how we can work together to change the game. See, I think one of the problems is that we're all still playing by the men's rules. Right? So one of the things that we talk about, and this might resonate with the women, is what I call sorry, please, and thank you. Women, you often say sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I just ask a question? Did anybody see, read, hear Hillary Clinton's concession speech? She apologized that she couldn't take it over the line. First time a presidential candidate has ever apologized. So we say please, we say sorry, and we say thank you, a lot more than men. Does it put us at a disadvantage? It might. Does it change how we see ourselves and how others see us? It might. And so that's when I talk about awareness. And so what do we do, what do men do, and how is it perceived? And then how do we change our own perception and work together to change their perceptions? So a great example I like to give you is when a man gets up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, packs up and leaves because he's going to his son's softball game, he is a very dedicated father. When a woman stands up at 3 o'clock, packs up her stuff, and goes to her son's softball game, she is not dedicated and she's not committed to the job. I think it's a matter of two things. One is how men have been trained and how the workforce and companies sort of describe that. But I think a bigger piece of it is how the woman does it herself. How we as women get up and walk out. So, and again, I share this with my team, the team that we work on together, and the women slink out. Oh my God, I feel bad, so I'm gonna hope nobody sees me, and I'm gonna slink out. So we begin with guilt, and then we get the guilt, and they continue to give us the guilt, and now we're stuck with the guilt, right? So it's the joke in the office. I tell women, once this week on, everybody get up at 3 o'clock and just leave. Practice it. And it's really about how you see yourself, how you portray yourself, and how we help each other. So I do want to, I know that's a lot about questions, but I will say this, I believe that we can change ourselves, and we can ultimately change the workplace, whether it's a law firm, company, whatever, but we have to do it together. See, the experience that I have in my corporation now, and that I've seen in this company, is women do make it up to the top, but they don't turn around and help other women come up with them. Because it's been set up that that's the woman's job, right? And so if you help other women, they're your competition. And men love this. They don't have to compete with the women. The women compete with each other. They're free to keep doing their thing. We need to help each other compete for every job. We need to turn around and give advice and suggestions and help to all those women behind us. It's the only way we're going to break through this wall and this ceiling and make a change. And I'm gonna say here to you guys, somebody has to be the first. I'm one, I removed a brick, got it going. You guys have to do it. You have to get there. You have to work to get there. They're still gonna think the same thing about you, but you need to get there. And you need to help the women behind you and with you continue to break through. And that's all something we can do with our behavior. Believe me, it's not easy at all. But the important thing is to understand that we don't have to let them make the rules. There is a place for us. Yes, you want a family. Yes, you want kids. You can do it. And we can do it when we make sure that the people around us, men and women, understand that you can do both. And just because you get up and leave at 3 o'clock and you're a woman, doesn't mean you're not committed to the job. And so I could talk for hours about this, as I have, so I'll stop now and say, for both of us, you know, what do you guys want to talk about? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned earlier persons who might perpetuate without intending to, and I was just wondering how, or if you have any experience with reaching those individuals, and maybe some advice for doing so.
Sure. So within my company, actually, they're starting a program for training that all employees will have to take called unconscious bias. And the idea is that we all come into the room, every single one of us, with a bias. Either because of the way we were raised, an experience we had, could be a lot of things. And it's a great exercise they do. And if you ever take this, I'm sorry, I'm ruining it for you. It's a great exercise they do. They break us into groups, and we all get different resumes. There's Jose, and there's Caroline, and there's Bobby, and there's, you know, Tiffany, and everybody gets with a picture. And you're told to assess this person for the job of IT manager. And then we all come back together and say what we thought. And of course it ranges from I would never hire that person to I would absolutely hire that person. The resumes are exactly the same, and the only difference is the name at the top and the picture. And it is shocking to see how people are reacting to this. And it's a mix of literally open shirts, messy hair, an earring, Hispanic, Black, Indian, you know, WASP, got the whole thing covered. And while I didn't experience it in my class, the person was saying that some people said, I don't like the hair on his chest. In fact, I would love you to look this up, Arthur, but there's the percentage of men who are over 6 feet tall and CEOs is not statistically appropriate based on the tall men in society. So there's absolutely bias that we have toward people. And what this class is about, and what the point is, it's awareness. It's understanding that you already come in with this, and to sort of check it at the door and remind yourself, why am I having this reaction? Why am I thinking the things? Is it because it's a man or a woman? So that's the thing I would tell you. It's really about awareness. It's watching yourself and watching how other people talk to you and being aware of how you talk to other people.
I think that you said something earlier that I think is a powerful reminder. You talked about the sorry, the please, and thank you, and you didn't mention it, but you said it in your example, the just, right? I just wanted to know if you had 5 minutes, right? That's another big one that we do, that we should take out of our vocabulary. To answer your question, I would say number 1, to women, you can be your own advocate in those situations. Right? So when that would happen and they'd say something about my 2 kids, do you know what I did? I laughed. I was like, yeah, they're super cute. They're 3 and 6 now. And I smiled. Instead of saying, you know, yeah, you'll have to do that if you have an opportunity. I also wanted to let you know that this is my 3rd fantasy sports transaction this year. So I'm hoping I can add value to you in respect of, you know, current issues, you know, in this area right now. Or something, you know, I can be my own advocate. I don't need him to say the nice thing about me. I can say it in context. You know, and guess what else I never did? I went home and thought about it a lot, but I never walked into that partner's office and closed the door and said, hey, Bob, do you have a second? You know, listen, when you did the introductions today, you know, I felt like the way you described me versus the other attorneys in the group was disproportionate. It bothered me. Moving forward, would you mind not, you know, kind of using my personal life to define my professional introductions. I did it ultimately, right? Well, it took me 3 years, right? So, but again, I was playing a little bit of that martyr, right? I thanked him for the insult. I never said anything, and then I went home and I'm like, life is so unfair, right? You do have control over some of these things. So I think that so that's what the women can do, and to the men, I would say, when a woman comes to you and says, I feel like my introduction wasn't, comparable to that of my peers, like, just listen to them. They're not attacking you. We're not attacking you. We're not gonna report you, right? We're coming to you because in fact we didn't go to HR. We want you to just hear us. We just want you to be aware and be receptive and sensitive to that.
So what was the reception? Because there are times when it's, oh, you're too sensitive.
Yeah,
Or,
especially
oh,
when you start crying. Because you don't mean to. It's like, see, what they don't understand is, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm trying not to kill you. And that kind of anger, right? That's what it is. A lot of anger, right? No, it's a great question. And I would say there are 2 answers, right? You have the people who are receptive, right? You have the people who are receptive and say they'll be more aware. 50% of those become more aware and more sensitive, and 50% say it and don't change. And then you have the people who say, you're being a girl, right? Stop crying about this. And what I would tell you in those situations is, I've had both experiences. When I've worked with the people who have shut me down and said that my concerns weren't valid, do you know what I did? I worked harder. I wanted to prove to them that I was worthy of those compliments, that I could do that much more. And I like to be liked. Who doesn't like to be liked in this room, right? And I thought, oh, I'm gonna convert him, right? He's gonna be a Taravan by the end of this year, right? I'm gonna make sure I do the best work for him. Do you know what I wish I had done, and now I do? I respect that person, and I don't work with them anymore. And again, this is one of those things that you have control. For most of you in this room, you're not gonna have one person above you. I can work with other partners, all right? At least in my case, I work for one of the largest law firms in the world. So why was I so convinced on making Bob love me, right? I realize now how foolish that was, so hopefully that question.
So one of the things I think about in terms of transitioning from school to practice is that school is a place where there's a lot of affirmation. And I've had other jobs where there's a lot of affirmation, like, a couple months in, this is how things are going. How do you build up your own sense of affirmation so that you don't worry so much about getting it directly from everyone around you at work?
So again, I'll talk about unconscious bias. My whole life I've been looking for affirmation, and I'll explain to you. Right? And in my corporation, in my world, it's never given. Never. It's like a joke. I just saved you $100 million last year, and your answer is, what are you going to do for me this year? Could we at least acknowledge it? So, frankly, any person, you need to start thinking about what you can do and how you've done it. One of the things that I suggest to the women in our mentoring circle is, I want you to make a list of all the things that you thought you could never do. Looking back on what's happened. And then I want you to check off all the ones that you actually did. And as you look back, you will see that there are a lot of times in our lives, particularly for women, where you think, they're giving me this job, I can't do it. They want me to do this, I'm not sure I can do it. And sometimes, unfortunately, we share that with the boss. We share that with, well, do you think you can do this? I think I can. And I remind you, they wouldn't be asking you if they didn't think you could do it. So the way that you do it, you really have to keep reminding yourself of what you've accomplished. Particularly the things where you thought you couldn't do it, and you did it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I would add, again, ask for it. One of the things I've said is that we don't ask for it, don't wait for it. If you want to know how things are going, walk into an office and ask how things are going. If nothing else, it helps you come review time when maybe there is an unconscious bias that now has been put pen to paper, and you can turn around and say, hey, Bob, I checked in with you several times throughout the year, this is what you communicated to me, so this review isn't consistent with that, right? And you have a checkpoint, so ask for it, own it, control your own destiny that way in terms of the affirmations you need. I would also tell you to need less affirmations, right? Because, and I say that as someone who needs them. You know, I definitely am like, good job. No, did you want to turn around for you? And you know, I think the reason that I personally need affirmations, and I think this is probably true for women, I'm very personally connected to my work. At least from my experiences, more personally connected than my male colleagues. The truth is, as long as my male colleague's job isn't in jeopardy, whether or not they save that $100 million is like, oh, it was my job, I did the best I could. I'm gonna think about that for the next 3 years, right? I'm gonna go to bed at night on Christmas Eve and being like, dear Santa, if you could just this year, right? Like, it's gonna torture me. It's gonna torture me. So, a lot of people would tell you to take things less personally. Here's what I think about that advice, because I've been given that advice many times. Ignore it. Just don't need the affirmation piece of it. But I don't know how people stay in this job if they don't take it personally, because the hours are long and the job can be hard and there are sacrifices. And if you're not personally connected and enthusiastic about what we do, it's just probably not the right place for you anyway then. Because I think without that personal connection to the work, you might not have the stamina required for the area of practice.
So I just want to add to that. So the personal connection, the commitment is critical, right? Particularly with women, they want to see that. But I'm going to go down to the micro level and say women will tend to walk out of meetings and say, I messed that up.
Yeah.
They didn't like my idea. They must not like me. Right? I'm so frustrated with what happened. Men walk out of the meeting and they leave everything in the room. I don't know. They go to the next meeting and they sit there and they do their thing. And again, this is where women behave, react, and act differently. That's okay. But you have to be careful. You want to be personally involved. You want to be personally committed. But you can't take it personally when it doesn't go the way you think it should.
I think that's such a good point. And I think I'm going to add to that one thing, which is when it doesn't go your way in that conference room, not only do you leave and think, oh my gosh, that didn't go well, they didn't like my idea, but here's what else you do, right? Hey Tara, this was not your best work product, okay? This purchase agreement had these problems with these provisions. You're so hard on yourself when you leave that room, and you think like, what did I do with that recruiter's card? Right? You panic a little bit. Again, you know, I think something that took me a long time to learn was that your careers, I don't care where you end up, not everyone's gonna get along, and that's actually okay. Your company's not going to expect you to get along perfect with everyone at the company. So I think that's something else that took me a long time to realize, like, it's okay to just not want to work with certain people or not get along with them. And, you know, so I would just add that.
So I want to add one more thing, sorry. So you talk about why we need affirmation. I'll look at mothers and fathers in the room. Any of you use the phrase to your daughters when they do something well? Do you say, good girl? You say, good girl.
I actually mentioned this to my mom. I've caught myself always saying that to her.
Yep.
And it's just a natural response.
It's a natural
and then I
response.
realize it's actually not.
We call our daughters good and bad.
Yeah,
You misbehave, you're a bad girl. You set the table well, you're a good girl. With boys, we say good job. You do.
Note to self.
You do.
Good boy alive.
Okay, but
No,
that's, and I've had the mothers come in and say they've changed the way they talk to their daughters, and that's something else that we can do. Why do we need that affirmation? Because many of us were raised that you were only good if you did something well and if you did it right. And if you weren't, you were bad. But that's not true. Right? So remind yourselves, you are not good or bad. You are getting results, you're not getting results. You're achieving the objective, you're not achieving the objective. You're doing it correctly, you're not doing it correctly. But it's not about whether we're good or bad. And I want you to think about this. For all of you who have children, are going to raise children, please tell the daughters that, not that they're good, but that they did it well. Yes?
So I have a lot of questions. I'm also, since this is about sensitivity in part, I'm sensitive to others' questions. I could ask questions until our time is up, but I don't want to preempt anybody else. So if nobody else has questions, I've got a lot of them, but I don't want to take the time of other people too. So yeah, I was going to say let's start with others, but
Yeah.
I've got a boatload.
And I got hours to talk.
Good.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier in your talk was that you were glad there were men in the room because they need to be at the table to actually with regard to equality in the workplace. How would you respond to the question, what's in it for them?
Yeah, so, I think there's a couple of interesting answers to that, right? I think to each man, there's a different value. I don't know that all men would perceive the value the same way. I come from a very traditional Italian family. My father's first generation born in America, and he's the only son. And let me tell you, he became women's liberated real quick when he had all daughters, right? For some men, I like to think it's because they have daughters. And sometimes they'll say that to me, like, I think that's part of it. I also think that, something you had said earlier is we have different skill sets, men and women. And the truth is that when we work together, we're actually our strongest combination. I had a litigator, and as you know, I'm not a litigator, right? There was that time and trial ad, but other than that, I walk into a room for a pro bono case, and I'm on the phone with my best friend who's a prosecutor, okay? And I'm like, wait, what side do I sit on when I walk in? I panic, right? So I had a litigator call me recently within the last 2 months and said, will you come to this settlement hearing with me and meet with us before I'm saying, Stephen, what do you, like, I'm not sure I can add the right value, right? Not my highest and best use. And his answer was, I need a woman. I need a friendly woman who like people like, because there's so much tension in this room. I need someone who can broker a deal for me through a relationship because we're not getting anywhere. And first of all, I'm okay with you saying you want me there because I'm a woman and I think differently than you and that women are good at building relationships. That doesn't offend me. That's okay. Good for you for acknowledging our strengths and our differences. And I attended, and it was a success. And what's been funny is since that's happened, I've actually had the opportunity 2 or 3 more times to work with other litigators in this context. So for some of them, I think we do add a different value. We do change the energy of a room, and our brains work differently, right? I think, we're not only strategic, I wish I could think of a nicer word about us than manipulative, but that's true, even in business. We're like, we know how to get what we want, right? So I think that is a lot of the value for them. Either they have daughters, they recognize the importance going forward, they have powerful role models who are sisters or wives, or they recognize whether it's women or the LGBT community or other areas of diversity, they just recognize and value the equality of it. But what are your thoughts?
So similarly, I would say you're talking about business. So chances are you're interested in moving up or being successful. Whether you're going to move up, across, whatever, you want to be successful. And the best way to be successful, in my view, is to surround yourself with people who are really good. And you want the best. And right now, men who are biased, frankly, are not surrounding themselves with the best because they're only looking at 50% of the population. Right? And I would say they're biased toward women, they're probably biased toward people of color, and so they're probably looking at 10 to 15% because they can't get out of that. So I think what's in it for the men is an opportunity to be more successful for themselves and to meet interesting people, learn new ways of doing things, get perspective. And if they're open to that, and I keep looking at you because you asked the first question, if they're open to that, they can make a tremendous difference in their professional lives and in their personal lives.
I would also add that studies have shown that at least on board service, corporate boards, if you have at least 3 women, if not more, that the company is more successful financially. And so I think it's in it for men or for corporations to add more women to their corporate boards and have more women in the pipeline going up for that reason, because it just makes financial sense as well.
I think to your point too, I think another area of diversity that people often don't think about, and I sit on a board of directors for a nonprofit organization in Philadelphia called Dress for Success, and when they asked me to be on the board several years ago, I looked at the executive director at the time and I said, I'm like massively underqualified, right? Like, I'm not ready to sit on a board with this. And not only did she kind of give me the encouragement I needed, but she said something very interesting. She said, we don't have any generational diversity on the board. So to your point about men and women thinking differently, they had men and women, but they were all basically that 55 plus community, and they wanted someone who was from a different generation. So generational diversity, I think, can add similar value to what you're talking about as well. So someone, yes.
So I just finished my brief. It's based on Pricewaterhouse. It's funny.
What's a brief? No, I'm just kidding.
What's a
So
brief?
it's based
No
on
kidding.
gender stereotyping theory when a woman was denied her partnership because she wouldn't wear jewelry, she wouldn't wear makeup, and her actually other partners in the firm commented, oh, if you want to make a partner, you should dress what other women do. But in the same time, as a woman, you're not supposed to dress too femininely in the workplace because I personally worked in fashion before, so last semester, actually, I know some people in my class, they made a bet, oh, her GPA is definitely below blah, 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 just because they judge me for the way I dress. So I was like, seriously? So it's like, in workplace, you're not supposed to dress unfemininely, but in the same time, you can't overdress. So it's just why being a girl is so difficult sometimes. Like when you go out for a date as well.
Yeah, so first of all, great blazer. I'll tell you that. Yeah. That's true. But, you know, I think we'll have different answers to this, in part because of I guess, like, I'm assuming we're a couple years apart maybe, so like we have different experiences.
Many years.
No, probably not that many. Not that many. No, but guess what? I think a 10-year age gap does make a big difference in your professional No, but I do think, I'm big on the generational diversity stuff, and I think that there is a lot of value in asking the same question to people from different generations. Every decade, I think, has a different value, and you should ask those questions, not just to your father, your mother, but your grandfather and your grandmother and your young niece or nephew. I mean, I think there's a lot of value in that. So from my perspective, something I would encourage you to do is don't care. Don't care.
Right.
Right? These are your rules. This is your life. You know what? If you're not wearing what makes you feel good, you're not going to perform well. You know what I say? My 3-year-old and my 6-year-old, every morning on the drive to school, right, while we're listening to Trolls, we sit there, and every morning before they get out of the car, I go, how you feeling? And they know to respond, we're looking and feeling good. Because you've got to be you, right? You've got to look good. You've got to feel good. Let me tell you, my attire at work, if you guys stopped by to see me unexpectedly today and I wasn't doing this, you would, and I didn't have a client meeting, because you should dress appropriately, you would see like a ponytail and flip-flops from here every time I walk to the printer, because I'm not wearing these all day, right? So be who you are, and whether that's how you dress or other characteristics about you, if you have to compromise those things about yourself, you're not in the right culture. And if you're not in the right culture, you're already inhibiting your ultimate success. So find a culture that works for you. That would be my perspective.
Yeah, so I think you're right, generationally, very, very different. My generation, I'm significantly older than you are, when I first started to work, women dressed the same as men. I don't know if you've ever seen this. If you wore the blue suit with the button-down shirt, instead of a tie, you wore the loop, and you wore a little bar, right? Dressed like men. I was the third woman in a department of 100. That's what we did. Tried to fit in. I think.
But can I just remind you that? So were you trying to fit in, or was it the style of the time?
It was the style of the times.
Okay.
It was the style of the times, and it was because women were just beginning to really, move up in business, and that's how you did it. The closest thing you could get for them to accept you is if you looked a little bit like them, right? I think the whole millennial generation has been a challenge to the older generation. So tattoos, piercings, hair, there's still people in the older generation who struggle with that because it meant something to them that doesn't mean today.
Like even nowadays, I heard when you go to an interview for a judge, you're supposed to wear like not pantsuit, just you have to wear a skirt and like a dark blazer or something like that. Seriously, you can't even wear pants if you don't want to wear a skirt. Like,
So here's what I would say. I agree with Tara. You have to be who you are, and you have to be comfortable. The only thing I would say is you have to be aware. So you have to be aware of how people see you. So the big thing I talk to them about is when they're making presentations. So I'm going to sort of throw this out, and you'll think about it as we go through more presentations. When a man gets up to give a presentation, people in the room will typically say, let's hear what he has to say. A woman will get up to give a presentation, and they will say, I wonder what she's like. And they will begin to look at, and the things they start with is what you're wearing. Are you wearing something provocative? Are you wearing a skirt? Are you wearing pants? Are you, more feminine, more non-feminine? So there's a perception. And so what I suggest is, you're not going to change who you are, but be aware of it. So I tell the women, listen, if you want to go for the provocative, sexy look, go ahead. They might not be listening to a word you have to say, but boy, they're going to like it when it's done. Right? Or if you're sure about your material and you're looking to talk about your results, then think about what you're wearing when you do that.
I think that's really good advice. I would say don't be short-sighted, right? When I say things like stay true to who you are and find a culture that works for you, that doesn't mean that I've never been strategic about how I conducted myself or what I wore, right? There's a difference between compromising your core values or who you are and winning the war, right? So if you ultimately are telling me that the most important thing to you is going to be to win that case, to win over that judge. You know that judge has conservative values. I don't think you're compromising who you are by wearing a skirt if it's not your preferred style. You still think you have to look and feel good, but you know how you look and feel good? You put on that skirt and it's like, oh, playing this guy doesn't even know it, right? Doesn't make you feel good. So don't be short-sighted. Don't ever be so principled that you lose sight of strategy or what you really want. Because I assume that what you really want is to be a successful lawyer, a partner, an amazing prosecutor, not to wear your fancy, right? So just don't lose sight of what's what, and don't forget to differentiate between core values and principal values.
So I was coaching I worked with some graduate students. They were going for professorships. And we did mock interviews, and I was giving them feedback on their behavior. And one of the women, I called aside, and she had a very short hair, sort of swung to the back, wore a very high button shirt, tight jacket, pretty much all black. Right? And I said to her, I found out she's married, she is heterosexual, but I pulled her aside and I said, what do you want them to walk away with? Right? So you're going to be a professor at college or university. How do you want them to see you? Because right now, based on how you're dressed, there is an impression, there's an idea, there's a perception I have of who and what you are. So if you're okay with that, by all means, go to your interviews like that. But I'm telling you, as someone who's never met you before, this is my perception based on how you've dressed. Right? And I'm not telling you to change it, I'm telling you the perception. So again, it's about how others are going to see you. You can care, you may not care, but think about what you're trying to accomplish, and if it works for you, go for it. Go for it.
I'm segueing a little bit, but something you just said made me think of this example, and I do think it's an important one as we talk about awareness and things. I worked with a partner once who had never, at least in the scope of my awareness, really caused me any problems. I got along with him fine. He's a decent enough guy, I guess. Then on several occasions, I heard him refer to other people, nothing that affected me. We have one of our colleagues in our group is an African-American man who I'm good friends with. And the partner referred to him as, where's Michael Jordan? And I said, who? He's like, where's Michael Jordan? And he says it like he's laughing. I have to be honest, like he should know better, but he is, I don't want to get too specific, we have a small corporate group in Philadelphia, but no, but I really think it was ignorance. I really do. Caught him a second time saying something similar about someone else. Ultimately, do you know what's funny? He ended up causing gender issues for me down the line. And that's something else as we talk about awareness and advocating for yourself and kind of like realizing who you want affirmations from and who you don't. Even if it doesn't affect you directly, to the extent you realize that certain people you're surrounding yourself with are treating others, have that little respect for other people, don't be such a fool to think that on some degree he doesn't have a conscious or unconscious bias about you. And they are people that I would recourse yourself from, get away from people like that, even if it doesn't affect you directly.
Along those same lines, how would you suggest going about maybe finding like a mentor or someone who's a good example in your firm? And a second side question to that is if there is someone in your firm, organization, or wherever you are that is a female, strong female character present in that organization, but is very anti-women, how do you avoid getting caught up in any sort of issue with that? You know what I'm talking about? One of those women who doesn't help other women.
I've never met anyone like that. No, yeah. I know you're talking about. You know what's funny for me? First of all, we've talked about this in class. I'm a firm believer that mentorships and champions grow organically, and that while you can create artificial ties to those people or prearranged ties, that they often, not always, but often don't have the same ultimate value. So be aware of that. Find people who authentically seem interested in you and your success. I also think something that took me a really long time to learn, I thought my mentors were my champions. I thought my mentor and my champion was the same person. And that took me a long time to realize the distinction. Some of my greatest mentors in my career, I can look you in the eyes and say, I wouldn't be as decent a lawyer as I am. I wouldn't have the wealth of knowledge that I have without some of these women training me the way they did. None of them were my champions. None of them. They're my mentors. I will always be indebted to them on some level. But my champions are universally men. Which again, different value, right? Most of my champions didn't take the time to train me well. They empowered me in different ways. But no, so to answer your question, make it authentic, know the difference, and in terms of the woman who's causing you problems, you don't have to win her over, you just have to make sure she doesn't hate you. So stay out of her way and smile and nod, and if you have, water cooler talk, make it. Don't make enemies out of anyone. Even these people that kind of aren't good eggs, first of all, it takes so much more energy to hate, right? That's not a good use of your time or your energy. So find a way to just fly under their radar, because they usually won't stand in the way if they don't feel threatened. And that's something else that's always worked for me. My experience is women like that, you need to reassure them that they are superior or more knowledgeable than you in many ways. And I found the best way to do that is to go to them with complicated issues and ask questions. Now, this is where being strategic and having control comes into play, right? You think I didn't do my diligence before I went in there and asked that question, so that when they explained it, I can say, oh, okay, so what you're saying is, thank you so much. If you need to interact with them, that's personally how I find women like that work, is they like to feel validated, they like to feel like they're so empowered. And don't misunderstand me, the practice of law is one in which youth is not a valuable trait, because there is nothing more valuable in our area of practice than experience. There's nothing. I had a recent recruiter call, and I'm not interested in the opportunity, but I did explore it to a degree. And one of the things I said was, how many senior partners are there, like at each stage? Because I never want to not be surrounded with lawyers who have more experience than me. It's just part of our trade. They're going to have a wisdom that you just can't possess.
I'm gonna add to that. So I think Tara is spot on with there's a difference between a mentor and a champion. Right? The mentor is the one who's gonna show you and guide you. Right? The champion is the one that's gonna get you that promotion. Right? Gonna speak for you. So I agree with Tara. I would say, and I do mentor mostly women, one guy. I tell them this is not for fun, this is just not, we're gonna sit around and chit chat. I wanna know what you wanna work on. You have to come with your list. What is it that you wanna work on? What is it that you wanna learn? Where is it that you want my advice? And so, like Tara said, you go to these women and you point out to them, you are really good at presenting. You're really good at working a room and building consensus. I would like you to mention me in that and show me how to do it. right? Point out what I'm doing wrong, right? Encourage me, support me, give me the tips, and maybe give me feedback after each, performance, right? I think makes them feel important, makes it feel special, makes them feel, they're really good at it, and frankly, you get something out of it, right? So I think it's not just, hey, will you be my mentor? It's, here's where I need you to mentor me. And as Tara said, a champion is completely different. It's the powerful people, it's the decision makers. Sometimes your mentor can be your advocate to the champion, but they're very different people.
So it's about 1:30, we're gonna go until 1:45. I know some of you have other obligations, you need to go, we understand, but if it's okay with you, we'll go until 1:45. Okay. So I wanted to follow up on the conversation we had earlier about being your own advocate. I think that's very, very tricky. So it's one thing to say to somebody who's in law school and they're interviewing for a job, or any of us who are interviewing for a job, even if you're years out of law school. That's a time when it's perfectly acceptable and normal and right to be your own advocate. And you should go in with your 5 bullet points of things you can say to toot your own horn, and you're expected to do that. And I tell students all the time, have those ready, right? I mean, you've got to sell yourself. You're the one who wants the job. They're the ones who have the job. So in some ways, that's easy, right? That's the easy part. In terms of the example you brought up earlier, where you've got several people in the room, you're being introduced, that's a much trickier situation.
It is.
And I guess the question is, and by the way, this is equally true, I think, not exactly the same because there are the sex and gender issues, but it's true for guys too, right? So nobody likes the person who's the blowhard, who kind of is very show-offy and interjects and says, well, wait a minute, I'm the one who worked on these 3 deals. And the example you gave earlier was perfect, right? Because the 2 guys are introduced with a wealth of experience, you're introduced to the one with the 2 cute kids, and yeah, you do want to jump in and say, wait, I also want to add. But that's dangerous, right? Because then everybody in the room, possibly wrongly, will look at you as, oh my God, I wish you would shut up already. Like nobody said anything about themselves, right? It's always nice to have other people say nice things about you, then you're the one who has to say something about yourself, and everybody in the room says, ugh, stay away from that person, right? Look, we don't want her on the team. That's not socially acceptable. Yet, if you don't do it, no one's going to do it for you. So I think it's a very interesting question of how do you be your own advocate, not when you're in the job interview, right? I mean, everybody's got to learn how to do that.
Not in the cover letter, but
not in the cover letter. Everyone knows that's the time. But these other examples, like the one you gave, that's a minefield, right? Do you have any advice on sort of how to?
That's a great question. I'm glad that you raise it so that we can discuss it and talk a little bit more specifically about those distinctions, because I think you're right. You can come off, as women, we're either too nice or we're a bitch, right?
Right.
And what's interesting is, while we'll call it cockiness, okay? While that cockiness isn't usually attractive to most people, what's really interesting to me is 2 of what I would call, and I'm going to stereotype for purposes of imagery here, but like our waspy, cocky young associates who are white men. If you have a conversation about partnership and they're 6 years away, people say to you, oh, well, John and Bob are definitely going to be partners. I look at them, I'm like, they are the most obnoxious human beings I've ever met in my entire life. So as men, and you do have to be tricky, you do have to be conscientious of the way you're approaching this, but there is a difference in perception. One, I would tell you, in the example I gave, first of all, I didn't do it, as I said, right? I wish I had, I just thanked them and said. Second of all, I think you have to think about your year and your role in the room. In that particular example, I actually was the most senior associate on that deal, and I had 100% matter manager credit for the work because the partner was uninvolved. So that's an example where I do think you want the client to understand the value you're adding and the role that you hold. Other times, if you are very junior, or the comment didn't bother you, or you don't think advocating for yourself adds value, always draw a distinction. If advocating for yourself doesn't add value, you don't need to do it, right? If I were really being strategic in the example you gave and playing that line, I probably realistically would have said something like, you know, oh, thanks, you definitely have to stop by if you have a chance to see them. And you know, I'm just so excited to be here. I want to thank Jay again for the opportunity to work with you on this. This will actually be my 3rd fantasy draft deal this year. So you know, it's an industry I'm becoming increasingly interested in and want to gain more exposure to. So thanks to both you and Jay for bringing me in on this. That's probably what I actually would have
That's a
done.
skill. No, part of me wants to say, you know, that's you. I mean, that's very good. I mean, that is fantastic. And I think that's at least one lesson that maybe we can all sort of take away is that what I think Tara's telling us, it's hard, right? You've got to be really good to kind of pull that off in a way that you say just the right words and not come off sort of as obnoxious.
Yeah.
That's very good. I just want to, I mean, maybe you won't know that. I just want to, that's like really.
But I want to look at all of you and saying whether or not you have that skill now, and it's a skill that I feel like I never master and I'm always evolving at, especially because your audience is never the same twice, right? So that you have to use the skill differently every time. But I do want to clarify that, like, I did cry a lot at first, right? So I did just leave and smile and nod, and then went to my office and called my dad and cried. So you know, don't get frustrated with yourselves. I think just the fact, even if you have that emotional response and you haven't yet mastered the skill, do you know what that tells me? It tells me that you're all aware that the opportunity existed, and that means that it's a skill you will develop because you can see the opportunity. So just, you know.
So not everyone is like Tara. Self-confident, right? Self-aware. So it's hard to do what she did. What I would suggest is that just a simple other way of responding would have been, but there's so much more to me than being a mom. You're not really saying anything except, I want to point out to you that he didn't actually tell you about who I am as a lawyer. And you can say that. Right? I'm a great mom, in addition to everything I do.
Very different style of
Right.
the two responses.
Yes, but, and it's a question of where are you in your career, right, the level, but even at a very junior level, you can point out, yeah, I got great kids, and they, you know, sometimes, you know, they get in the way of all the work I do here, right? You know, they miss me when I'm here really late, right? You can still throw it in and make it obvious that what was discussed and mentioned about you was not business. But if I can add to that, when I talk about advocating, and I know it's different in a law firm, but the thing that I describe as advocating is simply making folks know what you want. So my favorite thing is when I have interviews, to someone coming in for a job, and I ask women, where do you see yourself? What's the proverbial, where do you see yourself 5, 10 years? What's your career aspiration? I want to be part of a great organization. I want to be learning. I want to have new opportunities, blah, 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 blah. You know what the men say when I ask them? I want to be a manager, I want to be a director, I want to be a VP. They make it clear from the second they interview, I have career aspirations and I want to get there. And so, now it's fun on these interviews, I've actually, when I know I'm going to hire the person, I say, listen, after we hire you, I'd like to mentor you and explain to you other ways to answer that question. And what does that mean? And I tell people, if you want something, you actually have to tell people. Right? I sit with women, do you want to be a director? Yes. Did you tell anybody? It's back to what you started with, is you think you sit there and you're just going to do a really good job and get results and somebody's going to promote you? Not true. You have to tell someone what you want. You have to have a plan. Men are very good at doing that. By the way, I believe that's another reason for a wage gap, because men talk about what they want and who they are. And so they're already seen as someone who needs more money, deserves more money, is up and coming, high potential, where a woman is seen differently. A man will talk about his family. He's responsible for his family, and that's why he wants to be a director. That's respected, not for women.
I think too, like asking, don't ever confuse asking with confrontation. I think I thought that asking meant that I had to be, like, that it was going to be a confrontation, and I didn't want that, so I just didn't ask at all. I can't tell you, I'd be willing to bet that about 75% of results I would deem positive from an ask don't require anything more than the ask. And then the other 25%, I decide if it's worth fighting for, or if I was like, meh, give it a shot. And again, this is something that took me years to start doing, but I had a male colleague who's 2 years my junior, and I had a big deal this year. The fees for the deal alone were over $2 million for 4 months of work, and I this was about my 7th deal with this particular client. It would be the 6th deal unsupervised by the partner. And after I earned it, in my mind, I thought, I'm gonna ask for some credit for this deal. Which means, so I get my salary, right? But then in terms of becoming a partner, one of the things they wanna see is that you have one of 3 categories of credit, either that you're responsible for bringing in the work, you know, you're the relationship partner, or that you're managing the work. So I was talking to one of my mentor really more, and I asked her, I said, I really, you know, I wanna ask, but I don't know, I mean, I guess it's my job. My job is to support the partner, so I guess I don't have a right to ask, and my male colleague was in the room, and he said, well, don't you have matter managing credit on like everything you work on? I'm like, no, I don't have any, ever. And again, it's a couple years ago, and he looked at me, and he said, I have at least 25% on everything I do. I said, well, how did you get that? He's like, I just asked for it. And it was the simplest thing, and I was like, I'm gonna try that. So I called Mike, you know, like deep breathing, like mirror talking, and I'm like, hey Mike, you know, and I was like, listen, you know, they're asking us to kick off another deal. Would you be okay if I opened a new matter for this, and maybe we shared some of the credit? And he's like, yeah, well overdue, go for it, thanks. Is that it? I gotta go. I'm like, okay, good talk. Like, you know, but I couldn't believe how easy it was. There's times I ask and people say no, but I can't tell you how much credit I've originated without any confrontation. I just ask for it, you know, and I'm happy to stay for as long as you guys are able, but I do also want to mention, I want to come back to something we talked about earlier. I do think that the whole work-life balance thing is a really big one for women in this particular area of practice. For whatever it's worth, I want to let you know, like on a personal level, you know, like I said, I come from a big Italian family. My great-grandmother is one of my best friends. I have friends my own age too, but you know, she's fantastic. I'm very close with my family. I just got back from a week's vacation in Aruba. I married my high school sweetheart. I have 2 awesome boys and a nephew I'm obsessed with. So, I mean, I sit on boards of directors. I volunteer with community service stuff. I play soccer. So, I mean, I have a perfectly happy and fulfilling life outside of work. I can't say that was always the case. I mean, you know, I would say my family's the most important thing. My family's the most important thing, and then I would miss things originally, right? And you know, learning how to manage them is a skill, but it is possible. And you know, I can at least tell you that I'm really happy and fulfilled for whatever it's worth, and I also love my job. I didn't always love it when I surrounded myself with some of those wrong people. So I think, you know, if I could give you advice, it would be to cut out the wrong people earlier. You don't need them, always. And so I did just want to add that perspective that I do think it's possible. And I do think you, at least from the corporate side, you do have to take a deep breath and realize one thing. I will never have what the traditional person defines as a day-to-day work-life balance. I don't make it home for dinner at 5 o'clock every day, right? I sometimes miss bedtime many nights in a row. When I head into the office after this, I have a huge deal going on right now. You may see me in the suit tomorrow because I may not come home until tomorrow in it. That happens all the time. I don't have a good day-to-day work-life balance, but here's what I do have. I have a really great aggregated work-life balance. And I might be super busy for 3 days in a row and put in 71 hours, but guess what happens on that 4th day? I decide to wake up, take my kids to the park before I go in, maybe work from home the rest of the day. So, you know, take several days off. So, you know, you have to be responsive to client demands. Sacrifice is required. I don't want to imply that it isn't. But accepting that your traditional work-life balance, accepting that it's okay to have a work-life balance that's not traditional can still lead to ultimate happiness. You just have to redefine what that means. So I just wanted to add that.
So I think we have to end soon. Any last words from you, I think? No? Okay,
What she said.
so we've got to end now, but I think both of you are going to stick around at least for a few minutes
Yeah,
to answer
sure.
questions, and let's all thank you for
There you go. That was great perspective. Sounds like you have so much great experience, and that's all I still think it's probably work. Yeah. My dad's a CIO. But always a Oh, right. Last year was they had in-house packets, a little bit different. Yeah.
Actually started.
Oh, cool. Great. Yeah. And turn terrified into adrenaline.
Right, so I'm
Yeah, that was the busiest I've ever been outside of like. I think that's probably yeah, I mean, obviously some kids can like too. Yeah, like there is also
I
Yeah, I've been doing the classics. Just watching back and me last time.
Everything, fresh, always like, I put out a list of all the things that are, there's one, actually, that's his neighbor.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You're right, that's where it's changed. Yeah.
It's not gonna truly,
Like,
like, something
email me
that.
that, you're working on networking, right?
Yeah.
Class program.
I know, and I,
You don't have to have anything valuable to say. You guys are past the main point. You don't need like a big sentence anymore. You can just be like, hey, at the top. Exactly. Exactly. Look what happened to that. Miss you so much. You know, that's fine. You guys are there. You don't need the fake authentic thing.
I know,
Yeah. My 6-year-old's very into Pokemon now. So I'm this day, I'm like pretty good. Yeah. My legendaries and my knowledge base is really.
There's the color.
Yeah, I'm learning, right? Like Xerneas, what's
I
my
would stay here, I would
That's what I'm gonna do. And then there you go. My son would love you. So, that's good. I love it.
Other people
There was an evolution that no Omega charts on X and Y. I know about that. There's something else. It was like memes that were just
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I didn't know that word. It was like really mom, and I'm like, yeah, there's so many. It's so hard. But anyway, he's into it, so it's cool. And it's like in my mind, I rationalize it because I make it like rock and roll. I really like it. It's really like a fancy well, I'm glad you guys came and I get to see you and I hear you email me. I'm glad I got to see you. Did you have meet you in person? Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I was like, what are you doing next year?
No idea. Right now
I can't take the bar stuff out here.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I have no idea.
Oh, I like it. We're really support that. That would be incredible. I don't need that mindfulness and like being able to create a time like that. It's like such an important part of our job, like just connecting and regrouping and. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, I believe in it and I try and practice it. I do it every day and I do pick up skills to get better at. But my husband and I started joking about it about 6 years ago.
Why'd you say so?
Someone said that if we
Oh, really?
and he allowed someone else that all the people that were bid but didn't win are automatically losing.
I still have like my mind going on a deal or something. I was like, I just need to finish the job. I think it was 30 seconds. I shut my heart, I sit there, I close my eyes, and I actually say to myself, somebody should do walk in, kids are, you know, and they go forward with the couch, and everyone's like, what's for dinner? Like, one of them's like, and you're like, you know, and I literally 30 seconds, I close my eyes, and I say, whenever I walk into, this is the best part of the day. And you know what's happening? When the laundry's on the floor, and everyone's like,
Very clear.
I was like, I laughed.
So it almost like he's not taking it.
So I think that's like grounding yourself and thinking of you develop an area of expertise in that. I think we do it for someone.
I'm not gonna use that.
Well, it's so nice to meet you. We're so great to touch you. So nice to meet you. I love it. I know it's hard. I think it's my first time teaching, so I feel like at the end of your, like, I was telling Kim actually once, when I met with her afterwards, I was like, oh, things are too differently, like, you're supposed to like, torture yourself with all this. My first time teaching.
They needed a third teacher, so.
Even if you have like
Well, thank you. Thank you.
All right, I have a different, completely different idea.
I like that
That's
one.
what I'm talking about. Hey Tara, one quick thing.
Sure.
I know you
Thanks
have
for
to
having
go.
me. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you so much for including me.
One technical logistical issue that we should talk to Mutchison about. How many did you have last year?
Like 40?
Okay, we are, I'm offering this org strike at 15.
Oh, okay.
That's been a long time.
Okay.
I want the super.
Okay.
I just got so
Tuesday,
excited.
Thursday, Friday.
Okay.
And look at the
But you know what, that's the
Yeah, I
one
haven't
that I
seen
hear.
Maybe you should send it out.
Yeah, I don't have any emails from her. I just know that she was asking my review to bring me back, and I said yes.
So I will share with you that a week ago. To all of the full-time faculty. She sent, the first crack at what your calendar.
Okay.
Your schedule next year in the fall, Tuesday and Thursday, 6 to 8.
Okay.
Which is the exact time of teaching those
You know,
Which is also
right now, like,
interesting
we always watch
this
like
past semester,
gossip
assuming I was doing the same thing,
or it's just
my class was
gossip.
only two, I don't get Tuesday nights for like.
Oh, you know what? Maybe it's just so I saw Tuesday and I
Okay.
assumed it was a free.
I was like.
Oh, you're right, that's
I don't know.
punch more credit.
But that makes it easier.
Easier to.
Because they can.
Yeah, maybe, so if I ask, I should just, I don't care if it was me.
Yeah.
I guess right now, I'm not
Trying to be
super
hard because I do try to bring it down and get out there
There's
for like.
no nightmares, there's no evening classes.
Oh, okay.
There's no evening classes.
No,
Right.
no, but Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, Wednesday, I don't actually care.
So how?
If I prefer Wednesday, if we do a choice, just so I can pick up.
Oh, well then that's good for me, because then I'll
Okay.
tell Mutchison that you.
Monday
you
or
actually
Wednesday,
have
that works better
That's
for me than
even better.
Tuesday, it's fine.
Okay, then you can leave me Tuesday, Thursday.
Oh, yeah, so thank you, yeah, cause I don't.
So think of you as just
Yeah, it doesn't matter, but thank you for letting me know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was teasing her because when
There's
you mentioned I
nothing
met a
wrong
few
with
weeks
it.
ago for coffee and just to like go over the semester on my shoulder and I was saying like.
Yes, I'm on the
Oh,
way.
this is my first time teaching, so I was like, oh, there's thousands of things differently, I feel like you should torture yourself, and, after each class, and you're like, oh, I should have said that. And one of the things I said to her was, I have to be honest though, something that made it really hard when I was preparing my syllabus and stuff was that, when her and I
So
talked about what to
actually,
expect
I
for
think
Tuesday
I'm
night class, I
gonna
went
do
till 10 o'clock at night.
And I wanna start my own basketball
So
club.
personalized, and it was good for you, because I ended up like
And
working
if
with
you
people,
have
so.
time,
Say it was better than the rest.
And then what happened was, as the semester was going on, at first I was like, well, maybe I can make it work, and then as you realize she would make it work, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know what to do now, because I put so much thought into
I used to
preparing
live
it, it's hard to
in
do
New
on
York
the fly, but
City,
she said she's gonna live
and
here until 20 this
I
anyway, and
lived
then
near
I'm
Columbus
allowed
Circle for
25.
a while, and then I lived also in Dover for a while.
I lived on the Upper West Side
She
for
also
20 years.
Yeah, Upper West, I really love it. Like, I
Oh, is
was
that who I
for
shared
the
my thing with?
Lincoln Center, so it's like.
Yeah,
No,
you didn't run through it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
shared that with yet somebody else.
Oh, okay.
Who also wants to teach here.
Yeah, you can ask
One
me.
of these.
I
But-
did.
Wow.
I did it for Arthur and they're not even paying me.
That's so
You know,
annoying.
yeah, sometimes it's hard, and you don't get a lot of the advantages being full-time faculty. You're not paying for the money.
So I actually.
Credit barely pays for like your parking,
This is my
and like the parking tax. It's a lot of work, and it's like on the heels of working a very full-time job. So, I mean, I did it when I was a
So
PhD.
that's sort of more personal, and I would love to come and do this anywhere you want me to. And let me know when you start.
I loved it, though. I mean,
Yeah, no, I like
I
it
just so
too.
much value, I mean, I like the energy from it, and I love
Yes, yes.
So it sounds like you want to do sort of
I
stuff
also
in a meetup,
think,
right? And
so
women in fashion and
walk forward and all that good stuff. And I also think
Fashion law is a big thing right now,
really
especially
improved so
in New
much
York
about the
City.
semester, because I
I
had all this
live in
advice that I was
Florida,
given,
so
Right.
I didn't feel it to them, I'm
only
thinking about
fashion law
I should do
institutions.
this,
Right.
you know, you're not
making
doing
it.
it. Exactly, so I feel like that was.
in-house counsel for
validating
your,
in a lot of ways.
for
Hey, Dad,
LVMH.
thanks so
So
much.
all
Thanks
this
so much.
information.
Thanks so much.
Oh, actually, there's kind of.
I know.
What do you think of our class and all?
I'm gonna take it out.
So,
Anyway,
for
well, I'm not
example,
Yeah, sorry,
the-
thank you. And thank you again for talking to us.
And a similar.
I'm sorry that you played out with it, and,
So shoot.
I was disappointed that it didn't play out with her, I know that apparently she was like a front runner as a mother, and they felt
So we will talk about it. It's definitely not
However, they were like, she was great, but we haven't even created a position yet, but we do think we need someone, so she kind of came in when I thought it would just be lateral,
So
then
he
they ended up
went to the
saying,
court.
we love her,
with Diane,
she's a front runner,
like
but let's
Diane Wolf.
see what's out there in terms of opportunities, and then I think she was trying to ask
Yeah.
So basically, the
She's
judge
happy where she is, and
I'm
she
so
appreciates your
happy.
help, so,
I'm
yeah.
so happy to hear that. I told her back then, we have to
No,
like
but
before
it's
she
gonna
got
be
to
$800
dinner. Are you like in the new
Maybe
place?
Yeah.
something,
Yeah, that's great.
privileged people can do that, but if you,
Yeah.
if you're
Oh,
the
that's
person
awesome.
that have this privilege.
No more go flying back and forth, like, at your totally situated.
So
No,
all those
we
laws
don't
are
still have like
okay.
an air
So-
mattress in both ends of the country, where's the period, right? It's like,
I
this
remember
is
she
like,
was saying
we have
that.
two unsettled apartments.
Yeah, she's like, there's boxes everywhere, one, and I'm like, you're already sleeping
There's
together.
big distinguished,
Yeah, oh, she's so glad that we're
compounds.
very happy. Yeah, and tell her
Yeah.
anytime, I'm happy,
All right.
I'm happy to.
It's refreshing.
Her resume,
I
is
know.
anyone else take a look.
And you know what, you're combining everything.
Right.
For our alumni steering committee,
Yes.
you know,
But
if
a lot of
you
people
know
underestimate me for
because I
that.
don't,
They're like, look at this girl.
I'm not so thrilled
She
with
does
diversity
Yeah.
right now, even with a lot of guys. Feel free to send them my way, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, both men and women, I'm not saying I'm negative, but.
Of course.
And I also want to sort of beef up the representation from graduates of Camden campus.
Uh-huh.
So even though we're one law school.
Right, so sometimes it's
Still
not
the-
necessarily a
Yeah.
bad thing that people don't do.
So if you know a Peter who you think would be
And when you
interested,
actually
shoot me
can.
an email.
Yeah, absolutely, and it works both ways. I think a lot of people,
That's the thing, is
would be
first thing
interested if I presented an opportunity to them. So I think to the extent there's a subject or anything you're thinking about, I could send out an email to a handful of people, say, anyone want to talk on this? I don't know that any of them would go out of their way to show the initiative to say, find me this opportunity. I think they would all do it more as a.
No, I just mean to serve as members.
Oh, as members, okay.
Just to be on it, just to
Yeah.
say that we'd be on calls. And
Yeah.
I'm still doing like everybody else, right? So
They're all- I mean, it's fine to miss calls,
Yeah.
but we do have one or two people who signed up and like,
Right.
they're never on any of the calls, like,
Yeah.
call in, busy, and I know people are busy, but
Yeah.
it'd be nice to have some level of commitment, you know, but.
I didn't say this on our,
the bar the same,
I
but
was,
people
on our
do.
last call we had a week or two ago, I didn't say this, because I thought about it after the fact. I thought about it in that moment where everyone was like, so I think we're done, no one else has anything, and I was like, oh, it's too late now, everyone else. And I also don't know if this is
The best
too,
is when I go represent you.
I would say
and the opposing counsel
non-corporate.
underestimates it.
Do you know what you're like?
Right, that's-
I've
it's
seen Mr.
psychology.
Justin, the
Yep.
people that aren't even like students I was mentoring and talking to.
What's
So
the
many of them
tell
don't
kids,
have like
kids, high
basic
school, college,
skills of
when you go into
professionalism and networking. Like introducing
about
people the right way, the way
Right.
that like talking about some of those basic, I don't know, I wonder if we have any alumni that were like,
why do you
what do you call them, like just, I don't wanna say like
So what do you
professionalism
Right.
coaches or something, but I thought that would be really interesting, just like, hey, when you send that networking email after an event, this is what's on, this is what's
That's a very
appropriate, this
good,
is what's
right,
not
right.
appropriate.
That's really for students.
Oh, for us.
That, yeah, I mean, thanks, right, I mean, that, you're talking about a program.
For students.
It's really geared to students.
Yeah.
I mean, career shows I think has done things like that, but I don't know how effective they are and how well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, you really need the right people.
Yeah.
I think
And
students
that's
may have a
probably
little bit of
why I wanted to go to law
another
school,
like
because I
workshop
found
on
fashion
networking
industry
where all
way
these
too
old
superficial,
something to
even
do
though.
with
Yeah, I'm like, I wanna find someone who's more
But
interesting
I
than
just
that, right? It's like the
feel
person who
like
says,
judge
who
each
teaches
other
you
based on
personally, I think that a lot of those
That's just
subliminal,
so
like
hard.
psychological aspects of interacting or
Yeah.
keep people engaged, like when you say, hey, when you meet someone and they're standing and they're just the outside of it, versus when you meet someone who leans backwards, like,
Right.
these are subtle cues, here's what you guess what, you might not even be aware of it, when you go like this, every time you shake someone's hand,
Thank you.
you're actually implying to them subconsciously that you have something to hide.
If you found her.
Right,
Right,
no.
right.
I just think, you know, I'm definitely not the expert, but it's something I just think is interesting and.
I think Stanford, what they switched to doing, I don't know how effective it was, but it got people to come, was to do it as an actual like networking event, so they would get like 10 alums who are partners at firms to come and they would talk about how to network, and then they would say like, go network, and it's not just
very-
hypothetical,
but that's
because
not-
these
right,
people
because-
actually give
but
you
that's actually
jobs.
uncomfortable, right, 'cause then,
Well,
yeah.
that's
That
the
could
point,
be, I
networking
mean,
isn't,
yeah.
that's the thing, right?
Yeah, that could
It
be
isn't
kind of,
helpful.
that could be kind of cool, and then like you force them to do, maybe it's an hour long and you spend a half hour, they don't even know they're walking into a networking event, and then you
And
spend the
then
next
you
half
keep-
hour, you
do
can
it in
even kind of,
reverse,
I don't wanna say jab them, but you keep them interesting by saying, how many of you asked about, you know, the car they drive, that's totally inappropriate, whatever it is,
Right.
like you can actually
How many
have
of you
people
just stood
laugh
in the
about
corner
it.
talking to other students?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly, you can actually call them
Yeah.
out on things that now they're like innate, hopefully they just made some of the mistakes that we can now
Yeah.
have them learn from. Anyway, I didn't know if that was too.
No, I think it's a great topic. It's like making me like nervous to do it that way, because I almost.
But I think that's
too
what,
when you're-
I think the problem is when people just talk, it's like, people
Right.
are like, oh yeah, I should do that,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
everyone knows they should network, but no one wants to actually do it, so
Right.
forcing them in an environment where everyone the safe thing is that everyone there wants you to do it, so no one's gonna be like,
But then it's
I
so-
can't believe this
but
pushy
then it's so
work.
forced, right, then it's like so phony that, yeah,
But not if
I
they
mean,
don't
it's
know in
doubly phony.
advance.
Oh, right, well, that's different, you do it that way.
We just blindside
But
them.
that, it's almost like you're on camera, I mean, there's like a, gotcha.
You know, with my students, they had to do these self-awareness papers on their first day, so the first day of class, they had to basically write these papers talking about what they perceived as their strengths and weaknesses, and et cetera. And then we talked about the semester as, you know, like an example, loyalty is something I've always perceived as a strength. But then I talked about how through the evolution of my career, at some point, I became so loyal I was self-sabotaging. So, you know, sometimes I think you can have strengths or weaknesses, but you have to know how to use them. So anyway, we talked about what do you think your strengths and weaknesses are, and at the end of the semester, based on what we learned, we said, how well did you know yourself? Were they in fact your strengths and weaknesses? If you think you're good at being professionally assertive, but yet every email you sent, every practice email you sent to your partner
Right.
was completely like accommodating, no matter how ridiculous it was, you're
Right.
not that good at being professionally assertive,
Right.
right? So, interestingly, an overwhelming percentage of my students, like 85%, said that they sucked at networking, that it intimidated them, they didn't know what to do, they hated it. So, so one of the classes, and they did know in advance, but we spent half the class, I literally held a networking event in the classroom. They weren't allowed to talk to any students they already knew. They couldn't leave until they told me like 3 interesting facts about different people in the room that they didn't know before. You know, we joked that like they all owe each other a favor on a go-forward basis, that they can just like call in an IOU at any time, and it was hardly uncomfortable. But the lesson, and they said that, but the lesson was that they had to talk to at least, I think it was 3 or 4 people, and what I wanted them to realize was that the third and fourth stranger that they talked to in the classroom, they all said, oh, it was so much easier. By then it was so much easier.
Right.
And I said, well, that's the point. You have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations over and over again.
Yeah.
Who did you get? You have
Oh, I just did it.
Oh, you were the.
Yeah.
You were the.
I was the adjunct.
But who were the people?
Oh, my students.
They were
Oh, they were
each other.
mingling with each other.
Oh, with each other.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we did that in
Yeah,
advance. I
yeah,
realized
yeah,
I didn't, I did have one class that we brought in a panel, and there was some networking opportunities after, but no, the students admitted that they didn't know very many of each other.
Right, yeah. got it.
So that's what we did, yeah. Anyway, so for whatever that's worth, let me know if you want me to explore it, but
Yeah, no, these are great ideas,
Just
and I can
something.
talk to Becky and see like what they've done here already, and then how we sort of market this.
I talked to her a little bit about it, because she told me that
Right.
essentially it's involved, they're having a hard time getting to go to things
Right,
like
I mean,
that.
I'll tell you guys, now that we have, I mean, how many people are here? Like a lot, or
How many?
35, I mean, I actually count.
Nobody
but-
counted?
25.
We were speaking, right?
Right, I mean, I'll
It
show
was
you
about the same
now,
number as
but
in my securities. class,
We
which
were,
was in the
just
room,
of 25,
25.
were concerned, because when we first advertised this event, we had like nobody sign up. And I'm
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, I want to organize these events, but I don't want to do this if nobody's going to show up, and I'm not going to ask you to come down from you. I mean, it's crazy, yes, you too, I mean, you're closer, but it's very convenient. So we put the word out a little more and more.
I think it was also that we expected the students to like RSVP 3 weeks in
Right,
advance,
and
which
we
thinking
now
back to
know.
not that long ago when I
Right.
didn't ever RSVP and did it the last
Right,
second.
they either
Yeah.
don't RSVP or they RSVP literally.
In fact, we
the
had an
last
RSVP
minute.
for it, so.
I told.
You did,
I
no,
told
after,
Carol to
yeah,
write us down.
but after
Yeah,
you
that's true.
realized no one had
After,
RSVP, so.
So anyway, these are great ideas. I worry a little bit that, you know, we'll spend some time putting them together and then like 2 people sometimes.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Concern.
Yeah, that's where you guys come in, can't you? Where's your classes?
I mean, that's
Say
part of
extra
it.
credit.
It's part of it, not extra credit, but.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was why Sam was switched to having a partner, because then the incentive was, you might also, you could get it.
Right,
and
you can get a job.
Yeah, and that's why I threw in the
It's a
thing
real
about,
number.
Professor Adler, who was, I don't know if you weren't, is he still here, Adler? Professor Adler was he's a partner at Pepper, I think he's retired, according to Facebook, I think he's retired recently, he's doing a lot of traveling. That's why I mentioned to them, like, my adjunct was the way I got my job. I started my law school career down in Florida, my grandmother got very sick, I transferred home my 2L year, and while Rutgers accepted me, they did so with a 0.0 GPA, so I
Right.
got full credit. So I'm applying for jobs like 2L year, and I've done great.
Right.
And firms were like, oh, sorry, we have a GPA minimum
Right.
requirement, and I'm like, well, I don't actually have a zero.
Zero.
I transferred, but they wouldn't acknowledge
I have all
my
Fs.
GPA. Yeah, but they let me stay. But they wouldn't acknowledge my 1L year
Yes, I know.
GPA, so
Right.
it was this huge obstacle, and Professor Adler like came up to me and he was like, I can get you past that hump, you have to do the rest yourself, but no problem, and
Right.
So international. He taught a international transactions course when I was there. I think he does a lot of like international commercial arbitration kind of stuff. Yeah. And we studied like Roper v. Wade in his class.
He met two people who I tried.
Oh, really?
Okay. He was great. Yeah, he was a huge. There was like an unexpected champion, like we said, someone who just like helped me along the way.
So I think today, and I'm glad you didn't lead with this, because that's another thing people often do is like they mention things that are deficient, like supposed like perceived deficiencies. People did not know you were not a lawyer.
I know, someone asked me,
Yeah.
so where do you?
Right, where did you go to law school, where do you practice? Right, it's
I'm
great.
not a lawyer.
And I'm so glad, because, and if you did, then I was gonna call you out on this, because so often, and men do this too, not just when people stand up and they start the presentation with some deficiency.
Yeah.
Right, well, I know I'm not the real speaker for today, I'm a stand-in, but, right, and that's
Yeah.
not what your
Like,
audience
are you
wants to hear.
suggesting
You
not being
start
a
out
lawyer
in
is-
focus.
That's a good point. I never.
Right,
I
That's
saw
not-
myself as
it's actually
superior
a
to all of
further-
you.
It's a further, it's actually a qualification, but so often, right, then the audience is like, now I don't wanna sit through this, like the person has just announced why they're not qualified to
Yeah.
give this, you know.
That's a really good point. I have something I'll be more aware of.
But people don't do it, I mean, well, obviously you guys didn't, and not that being a lawyer.
It is interesting,
Yeah.
because you presented me as being, working for a corporation.
And people just assumed you were in-house
In-house,
as a
right,
lawyer,
right.
right, and I wasn't gonna say
Okay.
that,
Yeah.
but you did.
I had actually assumed it before I had read your bio, I told students that you
Yeah.
were in-house.
Right.
Some of them were
And we're
literally
both
lost in it.
sitting with the in-house, okay.
And then I responded to you and said, actually, she's
I
not.
would say better than having been in.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was great, guys.
That's great.
Oh, well, thank
Yeah,
you
that
for.
was great.
We're good together.
Yeah, it was great.
I'm much older than you are.
No,
Yeah,
I don't
that was a
believe
good,
that.
I'm glad I
I'm gonna
didn't.
be 61 this year.
Don't take it, don't take.
Full of shit.
No, you know what, when I turned 30, my husband said, I woke up that morning and he said to me, are you gonna have a super annoying woman who says they're 29 again? And I'm like, clearly you underestimate my intelligence, right? I was like, honestly, 2 kids later, like, I don't look the way I did at 29 anymore. I was like, so I'm going up, because you know what? For like 80, I look pretty good. I was like, these women who say they're like 21 and they're 40, I'm like, ooh, too much sun, right? Like, I'm like, these should be going up. So, no, but
How
I
long
really
ago
enjoyed your
was your
perspective.
30th?
I turned 34.
I turned 55.
Well, you don't look it.
I knew, so I didn't know that was the gap, but I totally figured that it was roughly the 20 year. But I did that purposely, guys,
Good.
like that was the.
Oh, that's what we said,
Definitely.
generational diversity is
Yeah.
so valuable.
And by the way, I just finished service on the nonprofit board, and for literally like every year we talked about diversity, and one of the, it wasn't just women and African, it was, we want millennials. Like,
Yeah.
we're looking for a younger generation to come on because it's about financial services, and millennials look at financial services, delivery of services much differently than people in their 50s and 60s. And
Absolutely.
exactly the same thing. So we would go out and we would say, we need like the 30-year-old
Yeah.
on this board. We don't want guys that are in their 50s anyway. We want some, but we're looking for some diversity, meaning age.
Yeah, no, I appreciated it after I had the opportunity to do it, and DLA does a biannual retreat. Actually, I should say that, I guess it's not the right word. Is that the right word? Yeah, every other year we do. Yeah, every other year.
Actually, biannual is both.
Is it?
means
I know,
twice
it's
a
Twice
year.
a year, I thought everybody said
Every
it.
other year.
Doesn't
Well,
everybody said it, I'm like, that's
Semi-annual is
Semi-annual for
twice a year.
sure, but biannual actually can be used for both, which is.
I psyched
ridiculous.
myself out after I said it.
Well, semi-annual.
Every other year.
Can you both look it up? With all those books?
I have looked it up.
Okay, let's go back to the retreat.
No, but we did a retreat, our retreat was this past October in London, and they have a whole transactional practice from around the world come. And it was interesting because we had a speaker on generational diversity, and it was fascinating. I was so into it. It was fascinating. Just the way they were talking about, you know, you have a millennial who has worked 80 hours this week, and you come into them at 6 o'clock on a Thursday and say, can you do this for me? I need it by tomorrow. And you say, sure, no problem. I'll leave you for yoga, but I can be back in the office by 8 and I'll have it to you in the morning. The reality is you're working hard, you're killing yourself. You took 1 hour for yourself this week, and they were like, here's what the baby boomer heard. You just said, no, I'm going to yoga. And it was so funny because you're like, you know, the importance of communicating the way people hear, and, you know, so it's great. Well, thank you for including us. It was great. I learned so much just listening to you.
This is great.
This is perfect. We might want to do more of it. I'll call you guys back next year.
Anytime.
Yeah,
There
anytime.
are several students who had to run out, so.
Yes, well, thank you so much.
Is there garbage can in here?
No.
Yeah,
On the way out.
Oh,
On the
wait,
way out.
okay.
And then Tara, we have another one of these calls
Sure,
in May
no problem.
for the alumni steering committee. I think that's gonna also be, because we can make it an in-person meeting.
Oh, okay, great.
But I only just learned about this trap.
Okay, I just met her.
So,
I just teaching here, I'd never seen it before, I thought the students would be drop their students
Yeah.
in that hallway.
Yeah, there you
Both of you.
go. That'd be great.
So,
Oh, I would love
I
that.
think that's early May, I don't know if you distributed that date yet, but we have a bit of that.
Yeah, I don't think
Sorry.
I've seen it.
Sorry?
The thing in New York.
Yeah, is that
They sent it, it was sent out.
to the elementary?
Elementary.
Yeah, did you have it?
Okay, I just didn't see it. Probably in my to-do box. It was so good seeing you again. Thank you for the opportunity. It's great meeting you in person.
But then I was like, ooh, I want to see some really bad ones. So then I started
saw bad
Googling
ones?
that, and I saw some really bad ones. There's one where both attorneys are held in contempt of court. One for like making faces at the other one. It was hilarious.
That's what I did to you, and before the argument starts, like,
Basically, and then basically the other guy was just like, he's making faces at me all the time.
I would do like the,
He's like, Your Honor, I can still see it off of me.
who would do that? That's dirty. No, put it back down. I like don't feel good.
Calm down.
Yeah.
Wait, that's a great way to start.
What's your argument? What's your argument? Yeah. Okay. What time on Friday?
10:40. Ours got moved there. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, wait a minute.
1:40 on Wednesday, I started, so I didn't like complete it. I didn't write out my argument though. I just started making that. Like I didn't wait time.
I tried doing that. How's your feet there? Did you have Lord? Okay. Yeah. I stopped at the beginning and I was just like, kind of assumed. Well, I'm sure you get more questions from the beginning. I didn't even, I just started going and then I just stopped and I was like, is this a good introduction? Like, I don't even know. And then she started giving hints and I was like, this is where I'm starting to go to. Like, this is good. Like, this is what I'm about to say. And then she's like,
That's good.
But I didn't have arguments prepared, so I just went with it like a
She dropped out.
Roll out with you.
This was his, that's what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, well he was but our second was going to complete the right. Because of that, he was fraud, so if there was
You know, the other section, the person that turned